As I mentioned, we're privileged to have a guest speaker this week through today and through our Vacation Bible School, but I do have one thing against you, Tim. Last week, I called Neil Anderson. Neil is the former owner of the Gospel Advocate and longtime friend, and I told him that Tim Lewis was going to be speaking, and Neil said, your congregation will enjoy him. Tim is my favorite preacher. What can I say? You will enjoy Tim Lewis. He's a native of Pennsylvania, and he embodies Midwestern values. He's deeply committed to the Lord's church. He is an accomplished author, speaker, father, leader in the church. I want you not only to hear him this morning, but plan on being back tonight and each evening for our Vacation Bible School as he continues this series. I'm glad to have with us my friend Tim Lewis.
Nobody ever says, one thing I have against you, you've got a better head of hair than me. That never happens, ever. The scripture that was just read, it's interesting how often our life, the Christian life, is compared to a race. And we're running to win the Stephanos, the victor's crown. Not just in the passage that was read, but again in Hebrews 12 and verse 1. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders, the sin that so easily entangles. And then this is really what we're going to be looking at this week. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. A lot of people start the race. They get off to a good start. Maybe you think of some people you've known over the years. They don't finish. It's a hard race. It's not a 100-yard dash. It's not a sprint. It's been described as, a marathon. It's an endurance race. There are going to be obstacles. There are going to be difficulties, pitfalls. Really, we're going to be talking about hurdles this week. When Greg called and said, hey, something out of Genesis, I immediately thought, I just want to talk about Joseph. I'm not making light out of any of the things that you're going through, any of the difficulties you face, but I just think there's so many things in his life that you think to yourself, have you ever looked, even somebody maybe here this morning, you know what they've been through and thought, how do they have such a strong faith? How did they get over that hurdle? How can they be so joyful? How is it that they keep pressing on? The Christian race, we've got a starting line, we've got a finishing line, but in between there are a lot of challenges that we're going to face. And so we're going to look this next couple of days at Joseph. And I'm looking at the details that I think are going to be very familiar to all of us. And maybe even, when I wrote The Domino Effect, somebody asked me, how was that? And I said, I just feel like I have a gift for stating the obvious, But most of us struggle with the obvious. Most of us don't struggle with the deep theological, hard to understand. We struggle with the practical, the daily, the everyday part of following Jesus. The first hurdle I want you to think about this morning, and as you think about the story and your mind runs ahead to all the details, is the hurdle of dysfunction. Coming out of a family that is so dysfunctional. His dad is a deceiver. Literal meaning of the name, chiseler, deceiver. Early years of his life, he lived up to that name. There's no doubt. Genesis 35:36, Isaac explains to Esau, your brother came deceitfully. He took your blessing. In verse 37, Esau says, isn't he rightly named Jacob? He has deceived me these 2 times. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing. Jacob took that birthright. He's selling his brother's famished. He's selling basically bread and lentil stew, but he refused to share the food he'd been cooking until Esau swears an oath to sell him his birthright. The theft of the blessing, it's even more devious. His mother helps to deceive. They put on his brother's best clothing, cover his hands and the smooth part of his neck with goat skin. They serve his father tasty food his mother had prepared. He not only told his father, I am Esau, your firstborn, but when Isaac just point blank asks him, are you really my son Esau? He deceitfully replies, I am, and then obtains his brother's blessing. I'm saying this is Joseph's, we got to know about the family. Some of us look back and we think, well, that's what I came out of. I know where I am now in Christ, because of Christ, because of the grace and mercy and the patience of God, but I know where I came from. This is where Joseph came from. Not long after pulling off that deception, the deceiver becomes deceived. Jacob loved Joseph's mother, Rachel. He's tricked into marrying her sister, Leah. We all know these stories, but I want you to understand, this is his family. This is his family of origin. This is how he grew up. He's tricked into marrying the older sister. The story's recorded in Genesis 29. Jacob enters into this agreement to his uncle Laban. I'm going to work 7 years in order to get the younger daughter. He works the 7 years. And anybody who's ever been in love, this makes sense. They seem like only a few days to him because of his love for Rachel. He loved her so much. 7 years went by so fast. It's a shocking kind of the events. Sometimes we read these stories so often. I don't think we're as alarmed by what's going on here as we should be. Morning after the wedding, he's surprised to discover Laban had actually given him Leah instead of Rachel. Offers this excuse: it's against local custom to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older. And so he promises to give Rachel to Jacob for another 7 years. This is his story. I mean, Joseph, tell us about your family. Well, my dad married my aunt, and then a week later he married my mom. I mean, can you imagine what's going on in that household and all the things that are going on around him as he's being raised? He loves Rachel. That's chapter 29, verse 30, more than Leah. He's married sisters, and he loves one of them more than the other. And then you introduce Bilhah and Zilpah, and you've got an already volatile family dynamic, ends up producing Joseph and his 11 brothers. One author described him as a favored son, but a hated brother. There's no doubt he's his father's favorite, but his brothers, they despise him. I remember a little cartoon one time. One of the boys was pulling on boxing gloves, and he's saying to his little brother, I'm going to teach you a little something about sibling rivalry. Well, I think something like that's going on here. It's not a friendly relationship. Genesis 37 and verse 3, Israel loved Joseph more than any of the other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. He makes him this richly ornamented robe. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him. They couldn't, think about this, they couldn't speak a kind word to him. So it's a tough household to grow up in. Now, there's more. They didn't just hate him because of his father's favoritism. There's this story that when he was a young man of 17 and tending the flocks with his brothers, he brought back to their father a bad report about them. Depending on your age, that's either a tattletale or a snitch. He's bringing back these bad reports about his brothers, and they hated him all the more. And then he starts to have these dreams. And he doesn't just have the dreams, he shares them openly. He starts telling his brothers, hey, I had this dream. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose up and stood upright, and yours gathered around mine and bowed down to it. And I'm going to be elevated and you're going to bow down before me. And then he says, I had another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, the 11 stars are bowing down to me. And you can imagine his brothers were jealous of him and hated him all the more on account of those dreams. And again, we see the language. They couldn't speak a kind word to him. You're clearly our Father's favorite. He's pouring on you the gift of a richly ornamented robe. You give bad reports about us. Now you're having these dreams where not only your brothers, but your mom and dad are going to bow down to you. And listen, that's the family dynamic. Polygamy, incest between Reuben and Bilhah, favoritism, jealousy, insecurity, hatred. Been in ministry for close to 30 years now. And even young people who are raised in the most ideal Christian home don't always remain faithful. Even those who have the advantage of a VBS, a week of instruction at a camp, going away to some of the universities, great parents, faithful mom and dad, a heritage of faith. Not all of those young people remain faithful, even when it seems like they have all the advantages. Just think about somebody who comes from a background filled with drug use or alcohol abuse or immorality or racial prejudice or any anti-God mindset or behavior that you can imagine. And sometimes what they do is they use their past as an excuse. I mean, how could you expect me to be any different? I mean, you know my father, you know my mother, you know my history. And here's what I want. I'm going to say this over and over again this week. Anything that has been done can be done. And this guy got over the hurdle of dysfunction. You have all of these things that are going on in his family background, and yet he is somehow able to rise above all of that and do what? Live his life in a way that honors God. Live his life in a way that is admirable and praiseworthy. If he could do that, I can do it. And you can do it, and it may not be hard. Sometimes the things that happened our childhood, these things cling to us. It's hard to shake free some of the habits, some of the painful experiences that we were subjected to, especially early in life. You know, some habits are really hard to break. Some pain is hard to get over. This week we're looking at a man whose path was not easy. There were a lot of obstacles, a lot of difficulties, plenty of hurdles. But through his dedication and his faith in God, he was able to get over these things. The second thing I want you to think about, you have the hurdle of betrayal. And this is chapter 37. We're looking at verses 13 and 14. His brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near the town of Shechem, and Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers. He's going to bring back word because he wanted to know that everything was well with them, and so he didn't find his brothers in Shechem. A man found him wandering around, told him that he had his brothers had moved to Dothan. 37:18 says, Joseph went after his brothers, found them near Dothan, and when they saw him, they see him at a distance, they plotted to kill him. They had a plan. They discussed it. They started working it out in their minds. Here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him. We'll throw him in one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. And then we'll see, you see some of the bitterness here. We'll see what comes of his dreams, right? When Joseph came, his brothers stripped him of that robe that they hated so much, and they threw him into an empty cistern. Didn't have any water in it. And I think sometimes we can sanitize these stories. I'm old enough to remember flannel graph. This is not a flannel graph. This is real life. He said, well, I mean, were they really going to kill him? Well, let me remind you this. his brothers Simeon and Levi, in an incident that took place earlier in the Genesis account, slaughtered the men in the city of Shechem when Hamor, the son of Shechem, violated their sister. These are men that had already acted out violently against a whole city of men. Killed every man and every male in the city. And now they're talking about killing their brother. I don't think this is a practical joke that's getting out of hand. I think they mean it. And maybe the only thing that saved his life is that they realized they had an opportunity to make money instead. So they see this caravan of Ishmaelite traders, and they decided that rather than killing Joseph, they'd sell him. They made 20 shekels of silver out of that transaction. Now, I've got a brother. I think he pretty much beat me up every day. Anybody remember a Hoover vacuum cleaner with that long hose? There was a fight that involved getting beat up with a hose of a Hoover vacuum cleaner. He won. This is different level stuff. They sold their brother. I want you to imagine, because this is later in the story, when now they're appearing before Joseph, but they don't know it's their brother, and they're speaking in their language, and they don't know he can understand what they're saying. And all those years later, after they sold him, they say, "Surely we're being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life. We wouldn't listen." He was totally distressed. He was pleading with his own brothers, "Don't do this." They didn't listen to him. They didn't care. What a betrayal. And then they take that coat of many colors and they tear it to pieces and they dip it in animal blood and they take it home and they show it to their father. So not only do they sell their brother, they break the heart of their aging father, who in chapter 37 and verse 35 says, "In mourning will I go down to the grave." And he refused to be comforted. I'm amazed at how many people will leave Jesus. I mean, walk away from Jesus, walk away from the church because somebody said something that hurt their feelings. Somebody did something that offended them. I remember a couple, this is so weird to me, that they decided to play a little hide and seek. They stopped coming just to see if they would be missed. And then they were offended that people didn't respond as affectionately as they expected them to. I know that there are a lot of people who have hard feelings against the church. What one man talked about the church, called it God's Achilles tendon. That's heartbreaking to me. That if God has a weakness, it's the church. Another writer talked about being in recovery from the church. Whatever anybody's ever done to you in the church, I'm not making light of that. This boy, his brothers considered killing him. And they weren't joking around. They were talking about killing him, and then they sold him into slavery. You read the whole story, everything goes on in his life. We're going to look at a lot of it this week. I never see him wavering in his commitment to God. I never, and he's going to have opportunities. We're going to talk about it tonight. He's going to have opportunities to rebel against God, to use the past as an excuse for bad behavior. To say, listen, why shouldn't I have a little excitement in my life? Why shouldn't I have a little pleasure? Why shouldn't I enjoy life? Look what's happened to me. Look at the way I was raised. Look at my dysfunctional family. Look at the way my own brothers betrayed me, thought about killing me, sold me into slavery. Never does it. He never uses those things as an excuse to be disloyal or unfaithful to God. In fact, throughout the whole story, He's a man of integrity. He's a man of faith. He lives a life of purity and devotion. I don't know all that's going on in your life, but would you listen? I'm not making light of any pain that you've experienced. But I'm telling you that through the grace and mercy, the kindness and the love of God, you can get over those hurdles. Well, when I do premarital counseling, sometimes I explain to young couples, you have to be careful when difficult things happen, when there's pressure on your relationship, that pressure doesn't get between you. Because when the difficulties of life come between you, that will push you apart. But sometimes when you go through unexpected hardship, pain, loss, suffering, as long as you can keep that pressure on the outside, it will push you together. And I think the same thing that's true about a young married couple is true about our relationship with God. When we go through difficult things, Joseph didn't pick the family that he was born into. He couldn't do much about how his brothers felt about him. You can let those things push you away from God, and a lot of people take that direction in life. They blame God. Or you can use those things to drive you closer to Him. That's what I want to encourage you to do this week. I don't want to make light of whatever difficulty. See, here's what I know. I know every person here this morning, somebody's come in fighting a battle that nobody else knows about. Somebody here today is carrying a burden that's so heavy it seems impossible to bear. Some of you are grieving in ways you didn't think were possible. I'm not making light of it. What I'm saying is let those things drive you back to God. You know, when you run, it's easy to get weary. A couple years ago, my middle child but youngest daughter decided she was going to be a runner. She's going to do cross country. She had a friend, said she was going to sign up for cross country. She said, "Daddy, I'm going to do that too." I said, "Great." She said, "What is cross country?" I thought she should have figured that out first. But I couldn't let her at that age go run alone, so don't I have the body of a runner? I said, "I'll run with you." And she did great. I just tried not to die. It was some of the best. Those years when she was running were great because when we ran, she would chatter the whole time. And I would just listen because I could hardly breathe, you know. But it was wonderful. And when you run, sometimes you get weary. And there may be somebody here today, you're running the race. You want to cross the finish line. You want to win that crown that God has promised all those who long for His appearing, but you're tired. Don't give up. I have a coworker that says the most spiritual thing a tired Christian can do is rest. You might need some rest. You might need a little encouragement. You might need the other people who are running the race along with you. You might need your brothers and sisters in this church family just to know what you're going through and to spend a little time praying for you and praying with you. If that's something you need this morning, we want to invite you to come as we stand and sing.